I get the honor and the pleasure of introducing the next speaker. Someone everyone present on the green knows, and if you're so young that you haven't read her, you have an assignment in terms of something to do before school starts this fall. Carol Kleiman was a nationally syndicated and award-winning columnist for the Chicago Tribune. I won't stop there, but I just want to note that the Tribune has been a very different paper from year to year and decade to decade since the 1950s. Carol, I'm sure, has some great stories about that environment, but the fact that she was there for 44 years and the fact that they had her for 44 years is a testament to something, I'm not sure what. She wrote daily about equal rights, the women's movement, employment issues. She's the author of 9 books, had her own television and radio shows, and was on the national speaker circuit. She was an active and devoted member of the North Shore Summer Project, Chicago's open housing marches, and the Selma March. Her commitment to racial and gender equality are the driving forces of her life. Carol earned her bachelor's degree in journalism from Temple University, her master's degree from raising 3 children alone, and her PhD from the Civil Rights Movement. Carol Kleiman.
Thank you very much. Paul, what an introduction. I'd love to meet that person someday. I'm very, very happy to be here at this very important event to honor Dr. King's unprecedented appearance. The word unprecedented comes from my daughter. Thank you, Kathy. And I want to honor the North Shore Summer Project. And I'm happy to be here to honor Open Communities Justice Project. Actually, since I'm almost 85 years old, I'm happy to be anywhere. And I'm sure all of you who were a part of that glorious, glorious summer project 50 years ago feel the same. Will you please stand up, the survivors of the North Shore Summer Project? Look at us. We were important agents for change, and we still are. So much happened in 1965 when a group of mostly suburban women, organized by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the American Friends Service Committee, we worked to get realtors on the North Shore to serve all home seekers, regardless of race. I was asked to give my personal experience today, so if I use the word I too much, please forgive me. We were passionate and idealistic, and we still are. I already knew a little bit about the inequities of the real estate market and how it worked to keep out minorities. When I moved to Chicago from Philadelphia in 1961, I bought a home in Mount Prospect. And on the contract, I was shocked to see it, I was naive, was a whites-only covenant. It meant I could not sell my home to anyone who was not white. I sued the realtor, who was also the mayor of Mount Prospect. What a small world. I won, and it was removed. Do not ask who I sold my home to. The North Shore Summer Project gave us an upfront look at racism in our own backyards. We learned direct action. We learned nonviolence. We learned not to overcome people, but to have them come over. And that's Dr. King's message, one of them. We stood in front of real estate offices where highly qualified applicants, such as the Robinets, I mean, you've heard these names, the Dusters, the Fortunes, and the Calhouns, were routinely turned away and refused service. Not even many residents of Winnetka and the North Shore who wanted to show their homes on a non-discriminatory basis, the realtors would not list their homes, so that didn't even work. The Calhouns did buy a home in Kenilworth eventually through a private seller. That is not equal access. It's a closed society, but it was very brave of both the buyers and the sellers. Our aim then as now is an open community. That was our goal. We stood up with our lives to achieve it. We learned so much from Bill Moyers and Cale Williams and Coley and Bernard Lafayette, who were our leaders and organizers. We learned about white privilege and redlining and the need to speak up. We were and are committed. And this powerful, powerful lesson I learned on the North Shore led me to the housing marches in Chicago to feel safe only in black churches, which of course probably wasn't true then and certainly is not true today. But that's how we felt. It led me to marches in Washington, to the Poor People's Campaign, remember that, in Resurrection City? And one of the most moving events of my life, to Selma, Alabama. At the time of Selma, I had 3 children under the age of 3 and was nursing the baby. Will the baby please stand up? Robin? Didn't I nurse him well? Selma was so inspiring, so courageous, exhilarating, and so vital. Thousands marched that day for voting rights, which Injustice Scalia has clearly decimated. We marched for equality. It was shattering to see the hatred on the faces of the mostly young white boys. I mean, they look like teenagers to me. Of course, today everyone does, but in those days, they looked like teenagers, waving their Confederate flags. Yes, that flag. You know, the one that's supposed to represent heritage. Yet the faces down south, the faces of hatred, looked very much the same to me as the faces I saw in the marches up south in Chicago. It was a historic day, and we need more of them right now. While I was growing and learning in the North Shore Summer Project, I was not a leader. I was a respectful, devoted follower. I was writing my daily columns for the Chicago Tribune. The editors didn't know what to do with me. I challenged them constantly on their racism, especially their use of the word colored every time an African American was mentioned in a news story that had nothing to do with race. They didn't understand at first, but eventually, to my great happiness, they did drop that racist identification at the same time that many other papers did. But what bewildered them was my involvement in open housing. Trying to be friendly, many of the editors asked me if I knew their maids. But since they didn't know their maids' last names, I really couldn't respond accurately. And when diplomats from Africa came to the editorial board to talk about apartheid, my editor insisted I appear at these meetings. The visitors had no idea why I was there. During the summer of the North Shore Summer Project, I wrote a feature story about eating at luxurious restaurants with my little kids and how well behaved they were. Of course, I was kidding. But the story ran with a photo of my entire family. And a few days later, that photo, completely obliterated with all kinds of obscenities and threats and everything terrible, came to my home in Glenview, which means they knew where I lived. Because it appeared in the paper, the Tribune called in the FBI. And who showed up? But 2 of the guys I've been marching with all summer. And they were the troublemakers. You know how much J. Edgar Hoover hated Dr. King. Well, they looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What are you doing here?" And it was quite a lesson for both of us. I found out who wrote the letter, the threatening letter. He owned the local cleaners. I was a big customer of his. And he was also a member of the John Birch Society in Glenview. And the FBI took it from there. I want to close with 2, I guess they're anecdotes about being with Dr. King. Dr. King, who spoke here 50 years ago. One event happened in Marquette Park during an open housing march. The crowd was violent, throwing rocks and bottles. We had to be evacuated. That's how serious it was. Buses drew up to take us away from the hatred and carnage. Dr. King was holding an open housing poster and standing by the door of the buses, ushering people in. He took my arm and said, "Hurry, get in." And he held the poster over my head to protect me. And as he did that, he was unprotected. And several rocks hit him in the head. He pushed me inside the bus to safety as the blood trickled down his forehead. There's a chilling photo of him at that time. I cannot be seen. I was safe inside the bus. He later said that the hatred he saw in Chicago was greater than he ever saw in the South. One day, I got a phone call from Jesse Jackson and Jim Bevel asking me to come to a house on the south side of Chicago where Dr. King planned to take over a home in the name of civil obedience, not disobedience. I told Dr. King I wanted to move to Hyde Park. He said, "Stay where you are. No, don't move. Lance the Boyle." Today, we still need to follow that advice. Lance the Boyle. There have been many, many setbacks for our equal society. But deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.